Good afternoon, and for those watching online, good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Helen Papper. I'm the Director of Global Communications and Advocacy for IFAD, and it is my absolute pleasure to be with you today to moderate and kick off this IFAD Talk on Africa's food insecurity, a paradox to be tackled. Having lived across the African continent, from the Great Lakes to the Sahel, for most of my career and in the most remote areas and at the heart of rural communities, giving a voice to those often left behind, I've always been amazed at this paradox. I have always been amazed at the richness, the resources, the abundance of local solutions, capacities. And yet today, we live this paradox. And so it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome Cristina Duarte, our United Nations Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa. Allow me to give you a little bit of background on Cristina. Her career includes more than 34 years of leadership and strategic management experience in public policy making and in the private sector, coupled with a deep understanding of international and regional cooperation and the challenges facing the African continent. She also served as Minister of Finance and Planning in the Republic of Cabo Verde from 2006 to 2016. Cristina, thank you so much for joining us today and the lovely conversations we've had all morning. So to set the stage, we know the world is facing the largest food crisis in modern history. That is the narrative of today, and you are bringing us the perspective from the continent of Africa. To tackle the food systems, and not just financing and value change, as we spoke about earlier, we need to go outside of this silo mentality that we are in. It's about connecting the dots. Today, we're discussing how food systems hold the key to transforming millions of lives across the African continent. So can you tell me a little bit about this new narrative about Africa, this new narrative that you have been working on so hard to make sure that it resonates center stage, local action for global solutions?
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here in this IFAD Talk. Addressing your challenge question, Helen. Food insecurity in Africa, to tackle food insecurity in Africa. First, we need to understand that it has been a chronic paradox, much before COVID, much before Ukrainian war. As it has been a chronic paradox. And to understand it, we need to understand, allow me to use that expression, to understand the paradox chain that Africa has been almost trapped. To understand the food security in Africa, we need to go, as you mentioned, we need to go beyond food systems, because the solution is not there. And the paradox chain is basically three paradoxes that Africa has been facing in a chronic way, and starting for the financing one. This is the first one that we need to tackle, the financing one. Africa is rich in financial resources. I'm not saying natural resources. I would like to underscore. Is rich in financial resources. I can mention 88 billion in illicit financial flows. I can mention 70 billion in efficient public spending. And more, 1.3 trillion in pension funds. You tell me that I'm not rich? Of course I'm rich. But at the same time, this same continent that is rich in financial resources, this same continent is begging for debt reliefs and debt suspensions. So we beg with our right hand, and we lose 88 billion in illicit financial flows. And this is a paradox. Much before COVID, much before. This paradox feeds another one. We are going to get to the food insecurity paradox. Feeds the energy paradox. Africa has any and every energy source that you can imagine. You say it, it's there. You say it, it's there. But we are a dark continent. We have been a dark continent. Allow me to put this in perspective. In 2019, the total energy consumption in Africa for the whole continent has been equal to the energy consumption of France and Germany. And we have all energy sources. This is the second paradox. And the first one and the second one feed into the food systems or the food insecurity. As we speak, the food systems in Africa, let's not discuss the concepts, but the food systems, the agriculture sector in Africa, uses only 2% of energy, of electricity. Can you develop food systems, value chains, without energy? So this is a paradox chain. Starts on financing, energy. And this is the reason that, going back to the new narrative, this is the reason that I believe 2 years ago, at the UNHQ, supported by the Secretary General, supported by the Deputy Secretary General, we start a narrative, very simple, saying, to discuss financing for development in Africa, to tackle financing for development in Africa, we need to put at the driver's seat, not ODA. We need to put at the driver's seat domestic resource mobilization. DRM should receive a primacy role when we discuss anything regarding financing for development in Africa. Why? Because as we speak, Africa already finances its own development. And the difference is huge. If we sum domestic revenues plus private savings, African domestic private savings, we get more or less $800 billion. ODA is 55. So we are already financing our own development. But when we say putting the DRM at the driver's seat, Hélène, it's not because domestic resource mobilization, they allow, to put me in a very simple way, will provide any penny that Africa needs to implement their huge infrastructure investments. Because once you build strong domestic resource mobilization systems, you build a critical piece for you to gain African governments, African policymakers, to gain policy space. It's not an accounting approach that we are going to get any penny that we need now. And once you build policy space, you are in a much better position to manage your fiscal deficit. Because you'll be in a better position to exercise higher levels of ownership backed by strong DRM systems. And when you have stronger and higher levels of ownership, you are in a position to change the risk profile of your country. And when you change the risk profile of your country, Africa taps international markets in a much better position. Not accepting euro bonds with 10, 12 interest rate and a very short grace period and a very short maturity. So basically, this is the paradox chain. I hope I was not too technical. I'm sorry.